Hi guys, and welcome to the final part of adapting the coaching process for the snatch. Here we're going to be looking at masters level and injured athletes. This athlete is John. He is currently masters level at CrossFit, and previously he's played rugby and MMA. His main complaints are intermittent lower back pain, which is managed with osteopathy on a monthly basis, shoulder stiffness, and he generally finds the snatch movement quite awkward and painful. So that's the key things that we're going to be working on today. So the aim of his training, firstly, is to remain injury-free, and it's really important that this remains a priority throughout our coaching sessions. And secondly, is to get stronger. So the considerations when working with masters level athletes or those who are injured is that the warm-up normally needs to be longer. This is really vital because the athlete must be in a good position. Obviously, dynamic movement is important for increasing blood flow and mobility as always. However, taking some time for activation, balance and stability exercises is particularly important in the ageing population and those who've had previous injuries. This is to help reduce the risk of any compensatory issues which may be causing them difficulties. For example, ankle mobility may seem to be a problem, however, the actual initial cause is because their hips are stiff. So spending more time mobilising the hips, activating the glutes, and stabilising the feet without shoes on would be an appropriate way of increasing the length of time for a warm-up in this population. Secondly, the injuries need to be managed appropriately. Similar to the previous point, the lumbar spine mobility is affected by hip and leg tension. And you also need to consider the amount of time the athlete is pulling off the floor if they've got back pain. And a good way of monitoring this is having a daily check-in with the athlete. This helps you as a strength and conditioning coach create a log about which exercises has maybe increased the discomfort your athletes felt. And you could log this whether it's the next day or 2 days later, or whether there's a combination of exercises that haven't worked particularly well. But having this daily check-in is really important for that. During the initial assessment, we just asked John to do a few full snatches, just to get an idea from the front and from the side what his ideal movement strategies would be. And as you can see, there are a few maladaptations that he's managed to acquire, which do predispose him to lower back and shoulder issues. So these, in summary, are that his anterior lean and his back is slightly rounding. The bar sweeps out and away from his body, and he lifts the bar with his back rather than his legs, and he also extends his lumbar spine when lowering the bar back from the top position above his head. And he's also tucks his pelvis and is quite unstable in that bottom position. And so, as we've mentioned, all these factors cause his lower back and shoulders to work harder. So what we did was we broke the movement down into the overhead squat, the snatch deadlift, the snatch high pull, the power snatch, and then a pause full snatch. We can see from this video that he's very unstable in his shoulders and is in fact possibly too mobile, and he also has a large amount of pelvic tuck. The athlete was then told to push the bar to the ceiling on the way down as well as the way up. And you can see how much more stable this makes his overhead position. We then analysed a snatch deadlift, and it's apparent that he's very quad dominant and uses anterior rather than posterior chain, causing the bar to be out in front of him and his back to round, causing a poor start position. Similarly, his triple extension is fairly weak and not particularly explosive, and you can see particularly in those first 2 reps how the bar swung again out in front of him rather than upwards. This was followed by some power snatch from the blocks. This is a much nicer movement to watch on him, although again it's clear that he tries to kind of shrug the bar up with his arms rather than using his back. And here in the pause overhead squat was a really nice way of getting him to think about stabilising through his shoulders and trunk, holding that bottom position and once there, being able to kind of feel for his balance and stability rather than just kind of muscling it up. So it was really important with John to show him these videos and to show him some of the mistakes that he was making. This awareness really helped him to understand what he thought was limiting his snatch, which was he thought it was his shoulders, was in fact an inability to stabilize. And again, he thought his mobility was quite bad. In fact, his mobility is really good, as we can see, and it's just a question of learning the techniques of the lift and activating his posterior chain more, which will really improve his ability to snatch. The aim of this video was to highlight some of the limitations of pain and mobility in a master's level athlete. Interestingly, the problems can often be different to what the athlete expects. In John's case, his main limitations were his technical ability, and also understanding that stability is much more important than mobility in this consideration. It's also important for John to improve his posterior chain strength and his spinal stability when pulling from the floor. This is to avoid these two images here, where his lumbar spine is rounded and not in a very strong position, and also here where he's descending the weight and extending his spine. Ideally, you want the weight to be dropped forward and in front of him. So the intervention is going to be a top-down approach. He needs to make sure that his arms remain long and strong to maintain that overhead position. Initially, pulling from the blocks until his spinal alignment is correct and strong enough, and also to drop the weights forward without arching his back. In summary, there are several aspects that need to be considered when coaching master athletes to snatch. Particularly is having a longer, more dynamic warm-up with consideration of balance and stability exercises, taking a log of their injuries, so understanding which particular movements cause pain, and also breaking the movements down